Good morning, everyone. I call the Senate to order. We are now in the early session, and the Senate will please be attentive to our chaplain, Pastor John Hopkins.
Let's pray. In this new year, we are thankful that all things are made new. We are thankful for those who serve in the New Hampshire State Senate, for all they have done in the past year, and the good along with the bad. We pray for wisdom and compassion to lead them each step of this new year. We pray you would make them strong and courageous for the road ahead. Give them ability, let their gifts flow freely, so they will serve the people who have elected them. We pray for protection over their families and friends. Help them search for truth. Keep them focused on what is pure and right. Let all that the Senate does this year provide for the needs of the people of New Hampshire, so that the people may prosper under their leadership. Help them to be generous and kind, looking to the needs of others, not to be consumed by only their own. May this Senate be lovers of truth. May they seek love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Through their lives, may we live in a different world. May this new year be happy and prosperous because of the work done in this chamber. Amen.
Senator D'Alessandro, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have several special guests this morning. If Senators Birdsall and Perkins-Cuoco could come to the podium.
I just want to thank you all for being here and paying tribute to Bosun Mate Second Class Melissa Hyatt. A lot can be said about the Coast Guard, and sometimes we're in the right place at the wrong time. And just like in World War II, during Pearl Harbor, the Coast Guard cutter that was based in Pearl Harbor was out on patrol because they were under punishment. So they were the only ones able to give any kind of defense to Pearl Harbor. Well, with Melissa Hyatt, she finished her training for the Coast Guard surfman training. So what they went on their training, their last run for the day, or the last run for their training, and they were out in the water. The surf wasn't as good as they had anticipated, but they wound up getting a SOS call. And apparently, I've never watched the movie. I was going to do it over the holidays, didn't get it, but the Goonies. Apparently, there was someone, and I don't know if you've all heard about it, this individual had treated the Goonies house in the area they were training. They put dead fish around the house. And as the police were coming, he ran away and he confiscated a boat out of the marina. And he took the boat out, not knowing how to run the boat. And he had to call SOS for the Coast Guard to come get them. And they were on patrol. They were able to rescue him from the boat. And then they proceeded to arrest that character. But we're here, Senator Perkins-Cuoco and I, to give kudos to Bosun Mate Second Class Melissa Hyatt and a New Hampshire Senate resolution. Be it known that the New Hampshire Senate extends its congratulations to Melissa Hyatt in recognition of completing the U.S. Coast Guard Surfman Training Course joining an elite group of search and rescue Coast Guardsmen. And be it further known that the New Hampshire Senate extends its best wishes for continued success. And this is one of the premier titles that a Coast Guardsman can have. So congratulations, Melissa.
Thank you very much.
A second resolution that we have is a retirement resolution of one of the longest-serving members of the Office of Legislative Services, Jeff Strakalitis. I spent a huge amount of time with Jeff as he wrote many pieces of the retirement legislation. All your colleagues are here. I thought that Speaker Packard was coming. You can come on up, Jeff.
They're busy.
The speaker's coming, right? Okay. You'll have to wait a minute. Can't retire yet. In fact, I'm told that you're going to be brought back as a consultant.
We'll see about that. I'm used to waiting for you.
Well, I'm waiting for the speaker. Here he is. There he is.
Had nothing to do, I was just standing around.
Be it known that the New Hampshire Senate extends its congratulations to Jeff Strakalitis. His dedicated service to New Hampshire, where his retirement as senior legislative attorney from the Office of Legislative Services is well-deserved after a career of over 28 years, distinguished by exceptional skill, professionalism, guidance, and wisdom. And be it further known that the New Hampshire Senate extends its best wishes for a well-deserved, happy, and healthy retirement. So I'm, as somebody who's sponsored over the years retirement legislation that you've written, I'm going to miss you more than anybody. That's why, saying you may come back as a consultant. And I think everybody agrees with that.
No speeches. I'll just say thanks to all of you, past and present, for making my job necessary. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say congratulations. I believe on your retirement. We'll see.
I've never said it.
When you get that phone call, we'll kind of expect some things from you. But anyways, congratulations, and thank you for all the years of service to the state of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Senator Pearl, could you introduce our page?
I have the honor of introducing our first Senate page. Lydia Wells comes to us from the town of Pembroke, and she's no stranger around the State House. All of us know her mom is Courtney Esbach, who works in OLS doing drafting work for us. So Lydia attends St. John Regional School and loves writing, and I'm looking at this impressive resume of this young lady, and I think we're going to see more of her in the future, hopefully around the State House. And she has a love of basketball, soccer, violin, tech club, math team, and scouts. And in the future, she wants to do some writing, either in the journalism, either for the news or the newspaper. So we all join me in welcoming Lydia today as our page. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. Guests, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. If you could join me in welcoming to the Senate today, we have Laura Lee Godfrey. Some of you may remember Laura Lee as the co-chair of the Governor's Youth Advisory Council and for her work for Clean Energy New Hampshire and the Women's Foundation. And she's accompanied by Malak Kayari from Morocco, and they are here today as United States State Department Stevens Initiative Alumni Fellowship Program. Welcome.
Further introduction of guests. Seeing none. Without objection, the following bill is special ordered to the next session. Senate Bill 194. I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Resolved that in accordance with the list in the possession of the Senate clerk, the following legislation shall be by this resolution read a first and second time, therein listed titles and referred to the therein designated committees.
It's on adoption of the resolution. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, today's FN report is adopted. Bills removed from consent. House Bill 307 from Judiciary. Senator Carson moves that the consent calendar with the relevant amendments as printed in the day's calendar be adopted, and that all such bills found ought to pass be ordered as follows. FN bills not waived under Senate Rule 4.5 to the Committee on Finance. Non-FN bills approved for referral to Finance by the day's FN report to the Committee on Finance, and all other bills to third reading. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The consent calendar is adopted. Well, that was easy. And now we'll be attentive to the clerk. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to request a 2-minute recess, please.
2-minute recess. The Senate will please come out of recess, and the Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 22, an act establishing a study commission to study automobile insurance for newly acquired vehicles. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Susi for the committee.
Senator Susi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 22 inexpedient to legislate. This bill would have established a commission to study private passenger vehicle insurance for newly acquired vehicles. After meeting with stakeholders to address their concerns, the New Hampshire Department of Insurance believes that the legislation is unnecessary and that they are able to address these issues. The Commerce Committee asks for your support on the motion of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 22. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Susi. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 22. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will be attentive, please, to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 33, an act relative to the fee differential of the non-member lot rent and manufactured housing park. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Innes for the committee.
Senator Innes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 33 inexpedient to legislate. This bill would have changed the fee differential for non-members in resident-owned communities from $25 to 15%. Resident-owned communities should have the ability to encourage residents to become cooperative members. However, the committee felt the percentage was too high and it could have a potentially negative impact on retired and low to moderate income residents. For example, on $600 lot rent, the fee would triple from $25 to $75, a hefty increase for many people. The Commerce Committee asks you for your support on the motion of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 33. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Innes. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 33. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 97 FN, an act relative to the use of animals in product testing. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill sought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Gannon for the committee.
Senator Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 97 FN ought to pass with amendment. Based on a compromise made between multiple stakeholders, the committee amendment would replace the entirety of the bill as it was introduced. The use of certain product testing on animals would be prohibited if alternate test methods are available. The use of animal tests would not be prohibited for the purpose of biomedical research or when complying with specific requirements from state or federal agencies. The Commerce Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 97 FM. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gannon. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any discussion or further amendment? And there is. Senator Waters is recognized to introduce floor amendment 0033.
Thank you, Mr. President. I introduce floor amendment 0033 and wish to speak to it. Thank you. So I do want to thank so much the Commerce Committee for all its hard work in this bill, and particularly the senator from District 9. And looking at it one more time, it determined we needed to make a couple of changes. One is a word change. If you look at the floor amendment, adding the word "not been granted," so that it's clear that if you have a waiver, you're good to go. And then secondly, there have been concern from the Judiciary Department that on who should appropriately do the record, receiving the record keeping. And it was a suggestion of the senator from District 9 that we change that to the OPLC, which makes sense and I think would clarify the procedure for receiving the reports that will be delivered from testing facilities. So I urge you to support the floor amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Is there any further discussion on the floor amendment? Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the senator from District 4.
Yes.
Good morning, Senator, and Happy New Year. I'm just curious why the executive director of OPLC as opposed to DHHS?
The labs that do the testing, medical facility labs do, their licensing is under this group, and for this particular product testing. This was the advice that we received, and perhaps the senator from District 9 could further, but this is the advice that we received after her conversations with the Judiciary Department, because we had originally thought of the Judiciary Department because it was potentially an enforcement issue, and we did originally have some penalties in there, and those were removed, and in removing it, it felt, well, at that point, it ought to be, it really is a kind of a licensing issue if they're not applying, if they're not conforming to their licensing, that's where it should go. So I hope that answers your question.
In a way, but thank you very much, Senator. Mr. President, may I ask a question of the senator from District 9, please?
Yeah, Senator Ricciardi.
Hi, Senator, and a Happy New Year. Again, the question, why OPLC?
In running everything up the flagpole and working with the Attorney General that this would fall under, these suggestions were made and requested that that department didn't want to have a mechanism of creating a whole new department, which is what they would have to do, and it would be a very large cost. And it was their recommendation, and with their expertise, I felt and suggested that that was the way to go.
May I follow up, Mr. President? Thank you, Senator. Did you talk with OPLC about this and them taking this on?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of Floor Amendment 0033. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading and open for further discussion and/or amendment. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to ask a procedural question. If this bill can be special ordered, I would feel much more comfortable with the bill. Having spoken to OPLC to see if they can take this on and how that's going to work before we give them the responsibility of maintaining these records. So I'm just going to ask if we can just special order this. Let's find out if they can do this before we pass it. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I would like to just let you know that we don't test on animals in New Hampshire. There is no company that tests on animals currently. This is all precautionary and a deterrent for any future companies wanting to test on animals. There's not one single company doing it. We have shelves filled with products that are made, that are tested on animals, but they come from other states. I just want you to know that I don't think that the workload would be immense.
Senator Carson.
Mr. President, thank you, Senator, for that additional explanation. It's that if we're going to put something into law, thinking that perhaps there might be somebody who are going to come and look at our laws, we want to make sure that we get it right. And I would just like to make sure that OPLC wants to take this on and they have the ability to do this before we pass this. This is a fiscal note bill. This is not going to finance because it would be something that could be taken care of in finance. The other alternative, Mr. President, is to ask the Chair of Finance if he would be willing to take this bill to allow it to be fixed.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was going to suggest that perhaps the Chair of Finance would consider taking the bill to Finance to give us a little more time to explore any potential cost.
Senator Gray.
Certainly, if the body suspends all the rules needed to overturn our decision to accept the FN report as written, which this would be a modification to, we would take it to Finance. But there is also the opportunity that all these questions could be taken care of by the House because this is a Senate bill.
Okay, I get the sense, after Senator Gray has spoken, that the will of the body is to send the bill to Finance. So, the motion would be, without objection, Senate Bill 197 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. Is it without objection? I'm not off to a good start in 2024. So I've just been informed that we need to finish voting on the ought to pass as amended, and then, without objection, we'll order it to Finance. Senator Carson.
President, I just would like to make a correction. It is Senate Bill 97, not Senate Bill 197.
All right. You're off to a good start in 2024, too. All right. All the amendments have been completed. Is there any further discussion at this point? So the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 97. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and without objection, Senate Bill 97 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. Thank you, Senator Gray. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 101, an act relative to penalties for violations of manufactured housing park sales requirements. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Innes for the committee.
Senator Innes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 101 inexpedient to legislate. If an owner of a manufactured housing park did not comply with RSA 205A22, then when their property was sold or transferred, this bill would have increased the penalty levied against them from $10,000 or 10% of the total sales price to $25,000 or 25% of the sales price, whichever is greater. There were concerns that this increase would be too substantial and that a sale could be held up based on the objection of a single person at a time when the housing market has undergone significant fluctuations and we need all the housing we can possibly get. The Commerce Committee, therefore, asks for your support on the motion of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 101. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Innes. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Excuse me. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 101. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 137 FN, an act relative to nano-brewery licenses and beverage manufacturer licenses. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Susi for the committee.
Senator Susi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 137 FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill would restructure nano-brewery licensing and fees into 4 separate tiers. The committee heard that these changes would simplify and streamline the process, reduce confusion, and ensure consumers are provided with a consistent experience. The committee amendment would change the effective date to July 1st of 2024. The Commerce Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 137 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Susi. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment? The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 137. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 196, an act establishing a minimum amount of uninsured motorist coverage required for vehicles operating as part of the transportation network companies in New Hampshire. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Innes for the committee.
Senator Innes.
Mr. President, I move Senate Bill 196 ought to pass. To ensure that consumers are better protected, this bill would establish and set minimum amounts of coverage required for vehicles operating as a part of a transportation network company in the state. The Commerce Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 196. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Innes. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 196. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 196 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 199, an act relative to standard of care for insurance agents. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be referred to interim study by a vote of 3-1. Senator Chandley for the committee.
Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 199 be referred to interim study. This bill would have required insurance agents to have a better degree of knowledge on the products they are selling to consumers than that which they currently have. Since industry stakeholders raised serious concerns over the ambiguous language of the proposed legislation, the majority of the Commerce Committee asks for your support on the motion of refer to interim study on Senate Bill 199. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chandley. The motion is refer to interim study. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer to interim study on Senate Bill 199. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. Without objection, Senate Bill 261 is special ordered to our next session on the 18th. I'm sorry, House Bill 261. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 93 FNL, an act relative to the individualized education programs of chartered public school students. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 5 to 0. Senator Ward for the committee.
Senator Ward.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 93 inexpedient to legislate. Senate Bill 93 sought to reconfigure the administration of an IEP for individuals with disabilities enrolled in a chartered public school. Despite having initially re-referred the legislation, after continued deliberation, the Senate Education Committee voted unanimously to consider Senate Bill 93 inexpedient to legislate. The committee's decision rests on the legislation's lack of appeal with charter school stakeholders, and further, the committee felt the bill requires significant modification which could not be accommodated for at this time. Please join the Senate Education Committee in supporting the motion of inexpedient to legislate for Senate Bill 93. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ward. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 93. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 214 FNA, an act establishing the Department of Early Childhood Education and relative to pre-kindergarten pilot program. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to refer Senate Bill 214 to interim study. Senate Bill 214 was introduced earlier this year to establish the Department of Early Childhood Education and to create a mixed delivery pre-K pilot program. Members of the committee took partial objection to the legislation and made efforts to amend the bill. Given that no consensus amendment was produced and given that introduction of similar legislation with language reflective of the committee's intent was entered this session, it was unanimously determined to refer for interim study was the most productive recourse. Please join the Senate Education Committee in support of the motion to refer Senate Bill 214 to interim study. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The motion is referred to interim study. Is there further discussion? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise briefly just to indicate that I will be supporting this motion, knowing that I'll be working closely with my friend from District 2 on a potential new bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer to interim study on Senate Bill 214. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 217 FNA, an act establishing a rural and underserved area educator incentive program for higher education, making an appropriation therefore. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4 to 0. Senator Fenton for the committee.
Senator Fenton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hereby move Senate Bill 217 ought to pass. Senate Bill 217 is relevant and topical legislation which strikes at the heart of our ongoing teacher recruitment and retention struggles. Abundant testimony had been delivered to the Senate Education Committee by educators and school professionals who made it clear that there were significant financial barriers to entry in the field, among other detractors which required legislative action. Although some on the committee felt that the scope of Senate Bill 217 may impact recommendations emerging from the Committee to Study Teacher Shortages and Recruitment Incentives, the Senate Education Committee supports Senate Bill 217 nonetheless, given its utility and urgency of the situation facing our school systems. Therefore, I respectfully ask that you join us in considering this legislation OTP. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fenton. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 217. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 217 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which is referred Senate Bill 219 FNL, an act relative to a salary floor for public school teachers. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Prentice for the committee.
Senator Prentice.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. I hereby move Senate Bill 219 to be inexpedient to legislate. As it came to the committee, Senate Bill 219 sought to improve educator salaries in the state. While this is a common goal among the Senate Education Committee, there were several concerns regarding the specificities with the language. Furthermore, the implications Senate Bill 219 had on collective bargaining agreements among teachers and school boards were a persistent point of contention. Despite the intention of the prime sponsor, members of the Senate Education Committee felt the language regarding administrators and their employment within a district to be too prescriptive and detrimental to municipal control. For those reasons, I respectfully ask that you join the Senate Education Committee in considering Senate Bill 219 inexpedient to legislate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Senator Lang to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the motion of inexpedient to legislate. The committee had some confusion in that the prime sponsor wanted to bring an amendment into the bill, which the majority of the committee was supportive of. There was some confusion who was bringing the amendment, so the amendment's in your packet today as a floor amendment, and I'd ask that we overturn the ITL recommendation, have an OTP, and then support the amendment that'll be following. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. If you're in favor of that motion, you'd say yes. If you're in favor of an alternative, you would say no. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion of inexpedient to legislate, please say yes. Yes. Opposed? No. Thank you. Senator Lang has asked for a roll call. Is it seconded? Senator Avard has seconded. The clerk will call the roll.
Senator Gendreau.
No.
Senator Lang.
No.
Senator Waters.
Yes.
Senator Prentice.
Yes.
Senator Gray.
No.
Senator Innes.
No.
Senator Ward.
Nope.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
Yes.
Senator Chanley.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
No.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yes.
Senator Carson.
No.
Senator Whitley.
Yes.
Senator Murphy.
No.
Senator Pearl.
No.
Senator Susie.
Yes.
Senator Birdsell.
No.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Yes.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
Yes.
Senator Abbas.
No.
Senator Gannon.
No.
Senator Altschiller.
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
No. The noes have it, 10-14. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Senator Lang.
I move ought to pass.
Senator Lang has moved ought to pass. Senator Susie.
Yes.
We'll have a 2-minute recess. the Senate will please come back into session. We're debating Senate Bill 219. The committee recommendation of ITL was overturned. Senator Lang made a motion of ought to pass. Now I recognize Senator Murphy for a floor amendment.
President, I move Amendment 2024-0030S. Ask to speak to that motion.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you. Mr. President, this amendment replaces the entire bill with a requirement that school districts prepare a simple annual report indicating average cost per pupil, average teacher salaries, and top administrator salaries. This amendment is a step forward for school transparency and makes available important information for taxpayers, parents, and school district employees alike, and I ask the body to please support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. Is there discussion on the amendment? Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just for point of clarification, or a few points of clarification, the majority of the committee did vote in expedient to legislate, and I don't believe there was any confusion. During the course of a number of months, and I do certainly appreciate my colleague from District 16's work on this, make sure I have the right district, yes, work on this, there were a number of months to opportunities to receive this document. We're all for students first, we're all for paying teachers better, and certainly transparency, especially after serving on the local level, is as important to me as it is to you and to others. But this, as a person who's been, only on Senate Education for 3 years, it's an entirely new bill, and I think that Senate Education needs to hear this before we pass it. So that's what I want to say, and so I'm going to vote against this. I'd ask others to vote against it, and if there's a way that we can get this back into the hands of the people who, were waiting to get it for months, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. A question of Senator Murphy, please.
Senator Murphy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the question. Senator Murphy, is it all of this information, public information, and available now? I served on our local school board for 10 years, and this information was available every year. It was available at the state level and at the local level. It's there. What do we need another piece of legislation for to implement something that's already in existence? Yes, and the question is, don't we have this information now? Isn't it available now to everybody? Why do we need another methodology?
Thank you for the question, treasured colleague. The answer is the information is generally available on most websites or in budget documents, but it requires a deep dive. It requires a lot of work and research to come up with these figures. And this bill requires districts to prepare a simple one-page set of charts, or even a single chart detailing those 3 data points. I think it's a simple step towards school transparency. It makes it easier for budgeting going forward. So taxpayers know where their money is going, and parents know where the school money is going. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question of the senator from District 16. Would you take my question?
I will.
Thank you very much. I wanted to know if you had an opportunity to speak with the stakeholders in terms of the superintendents and principals. Have they seen this, and have you had any feedback? If this data is already publicly available and there's a deep dive that needs to be done, what is their feedback on this?
Thank you for the question. I have spoken to the administrators and school boards of 2 of the towns in my district and ascertained that the information is available, but again requires some work and some math and some research on the part of people to find the information. It's not as if the information, these charts exist as prescribed in this amendment already in the budget documents.
Okay, can I just quickly do a follow-up? Sorry, Senator Murphy. So in terms of statewide and the stakeholder groups that typically come to Senate Education to talk about these bills, have you had an opportunity to interact with any of those groups, like the Superintendents Association, School Board Association, principals, any of those education stakeholders? I appreciate you've done it in your district, just have we heard any other feedback?
The answer would be no, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Senator Rosenwald.
The senator from District 16, if I'll take it. And it's, let me just say it's great to hear you speak. Thank you for taking my question. I'm looking at this section on civil remedies, which is page 2, starting on line 24. And I'm wondering if the cities and towns, if they make a mistake or don't get their websites down, they don't get it posted, or the local newspaper doesn't print that day, like in my city or town, is the city or town on the hook for this civil action? And is that going to raise my property taxes?
Thank you for the question. Only if a school district were to willfully ignore the intent of legislation and refuse essentially to share the information, prepare the information and share it, would they be potentially on the hook for any sort of civil remedy. This is simply there to make sure the information is prepared and the law is followed. Thank you.
Follow up?
Thank you. Could you point me, please, to where it says willfully?
Well, line 24, Senator, begins, any person aggrieved by a violation of this chapter may petition the Superior Court for the relief. So a taxpayer or parent or someone aggrieved by the violation of the chapter, the violation would be refusing to prepare the information, refusing to have it ready, would then petition the court. And the court may award attorney's fees to a public body or public agency or employee or member thereof. So it isn't simply any person aggrieved by a violation, it's to a public body or public agency or employee or member thereof for having to defend against a lawsuit under the provisions of this subdivision if the court finds the lawsuit is in bad faith, frivolous, unjust, vexatious, wanton, or oppressive. So there would have to be, the court would have to find that the lawsuit was in bad faith, frivolous, unjust, wanton, or oppressive.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
President, a question to my colleague from District 16, if you could. Happy New Year, Senator Murphy.
Good to see you again, Senator.
You know, while you were talking, I guess it raised a couple other questions for me. I was just looking at the line you were just talking about, line 24, civil remedies. It reads, any person aggrieved by a violation of this chapter may petition the Superior Court for relief. So, I mean, I guess for me it raises the question, this is not restricted to residents, it's not restricted to voters. Could somebody from another town be aggrieved? Could a national organization be aggrieved because this wasn't being followed? I guess I'm concerned that we're putting something into law that really could result in costs to cities and towns that really could drive up property taxes. So I just wonder if you could respond to that.
Well, thank you for the question. I believe there's an issue of standing. It couldn't be somebody simply anywhere in the state of New Hampshire would be qualified as aggrieved. They would need to be someone who is aggrieved and have standing in that jurisdiction. So, I hope that answers your question.
Follow up, if I may. Thank you, Senator Murphy. I guess I would question, I mean, shouldn't we as legislators really draft in who has standing, and shouldn't we do the work to limit that?
Senator, I think the language is very clear, and I understand it perfectly well, and I don't think we need to send it back to committee. If that's the will of the body, I'll certainly respect that, but I think that the way it's drafted is reasonable.
All right. Thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang, to speak.
Thank you for taking my question. So I just want to be clear, so we're kind of running around all this conversation. As I understand the amendment, the purpose of the amendment is, as we know in the state of New Hampshire, we talk a lot about education, taxes, and where money goes and how it's being spent, and voters have a distinct interest in what that looks like. And having served on the school board for 2 terms, I know that trying to find that information that we're talking about here is a deep dive. So my question is the whole purpose of this bill to make it easy for voters to see where their money's going?
This is all about transparency to taxpayers. Thank you for saying so.
Thank you.
Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to raise significant concerns about this amendment. I think we all support transparency. But I think the questions raised on the floor today show that our constituents will have questions. I certainly know that my community will have questions about this. I think, even reading this language briefly, I think there are major questions about standing, who can make these requests, who can file the civil action. I think there needs to be broader conversation about the civil remedies, whether they are consistent with existing law. I think we are a more deliberative body than taking a brand new bill, a floor amendment on convening day. So I would request that we vote down this amendment and send this back to committee. Thank you, Mr.
Whitley, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the senator from District 15. Thank you, Senator. Actually, a couple questions. So would your assumption be that this would be an unfunded mandate unless the Finance Committee found a funding source?
I think that's right, yes.
And my second question is because of your legal background. I see on line 28 the bad faith, frivolous, unjust, vexatious, wanton, or oppressive, and clear enough there. But if you go back up in the bill to line 6 and then line 12, where it mentions a good faith effort. Now, is it not the case that someone could feel aggrieved because they didn't feel a good faith effort was made, and so those legal expenses would not be necessarily covered under the language on line 28?
I think that's right. I think that's a very open-ended standard that we would want to explore more in committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Is there any further discussion on the floor amendment? Senator Fenton.
Mr. President, question for my colleague from District 5. Just to clarify some things, was there confusion that there was an amendment coming for this bill or that we were confused on the committee?
Thank you for the question. I wasn't confused. There was conversation that there was an amendment that was going to come, but we never saw it in committee. Okay, so there was a conversation. The sponsor wanted to do work on the bill. I wasn't confused about that. We never saw it in committee, and so it was a majority. In fact, everybody that was there that day voted to put this in expedient to legislate.
Follow up. In your opinion, is this a completely different bill than what was originally heard?
In my opinion, yes, it is.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the amendment. Mr. President, this is about transparency in education. My colleague from District 2 had talked about transparency. Why is transparency so important? I don't know about any of you, but when I go through my district, and especially in the month of December when those tax bills arrive, and people are down at town hall and they're paying their taxes, they're not smiling. They have questions. And when you look at your tax bill, where do most of those taxes go? They go to the school. Now, I know when I attend my deliberative sessions, we get a booklet that's probably about that thick of information, just on schools alone. Now, where am I going to look for this information? How am I going to find it? I mean, I've got a pretty good idea, but the average person is going to spend a lot of time going through this book trying to find and ask the question, why are the taxes so high when enrollment is declining? How come it's not going down? And they want to know. And I think this is going to help them and get an answer to their question. And it doesn't matter which district you're in. I challenge all of you, go out and talk to your constituents about school funding, how they feel about it. Is it too much? Why are we paying so much for schools? Where are my tax dollars going? In today's economy, with the price of housing, food, medical, everything going up over and higher and higher and higher, people are struggling. And people care about their schools. But they have the right to know where the dollars are being spent and to be able to ask that question. We all want to pay our teachers a good salary. But you also want to know, where's the rest of the money going? Is it going into maintenance of buildings? Is it going into curriculum? We don't know, and it's hard to find that information. Mr. President, this amendment, I think, is a good step forward, and I'm asking my colleagues to please support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Whitley.
Question of my friend from District 5. Thank you for taking my question. I think my friend from District 14 raises a very important issue about our property taxes, and I would agree with her that our property taxes are quite high, but we do have a recent decision from the Superior Court saying there's a reason for that, and that's because our state sends very little to our local districts in terms of state funding. In fact, are you aware that we are last in the entire country for how much money the state sends to our local districts?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I would.
Follow up? So because of that, because of the Superior Court decision, because we are 50th in how much we send back to our local school districts, which wildly increases our property tax, which makes everyone in December have a heart attack when they get their property tax bill. Shouldn't this report include how much the state sends back to our local districts? Shouldn't the report include that? Don't our residents have a right to know that information?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
Senator Altschiller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that my colleague from District 14 brought up transparency, and I feel it is necessary to circle back around to where this began with a Senate Bill 219 was heard on February 14th, and by the committee report, we had 72 people sign in to support the original bill, and 164 people sign in opposition to the original bill, and that this floor amendment is a replace all. And so I would think that if we were indeed going to be embracing transparency, we would send this back to committee to have a full hearing on the contents of what is actually in this floor amendment, instead of pulling a bait and switch on the taxpayers and not being very transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Altschiller. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of floor amendment 0030. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor? Roll call has been requested. Is it seconded? Yeah, seconded by Senator Birdsall. The clerk will please call the roll. We're missing
Senator Chandler.
Senator Chandler. We are not missing Senator Chandler.
I'm ready. Senator Gendreau.
Yes.
Senator Lang.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
No.
Senator Prentice.
No.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Innes.
Yes.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Rishardi.
Senator Rishardi?
Yes.
Senator Fenton.
No.
Senator Chandler.
No.
Senator Avard.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald.
No.
Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Whitley.
No.
Senator Murphy.
Yes.
Senator Pearl.
Yes.
Senator Susie.
No.
Senator Birdsall.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
No.
Senator Perkins Cuoca.
No.
Senator Abbas.
Yes.
Senator Gannon.
Yes.
Senator Altschiller.
No.
Senator Bradley.
Yes.
14.
The ayes have it. Floor amendment 0030 passes 14 to 10. The bill is still on second reading, open for further discussion and/or amendment. Seeing no further discussion, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 219. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and Senate Bill 219 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which is referred, House Bill 572 FN, an act relative to eligibility for free school meals. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4-0. Senator Ward for the committee.
Senator Ward.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hereby move House Bill 572 ought to pass. House Bill 572 is another income eligibility adjustment for an aid program. Like previous legislation relating to EFA, so the RX Advantage, House Bill 572 would increase the income eligibility for the free and reduced meals program to 300% of the familiar federal poverty line. In addition to the income eligibility being brought to near parity with other state programs, the committee supports House Bill 572 given the impact nutrition has upon educational outcomes, as detailed in testimony provided to the committee. I respectfully ask that you support the committee's recommendation of ought to pass for House Bill 572. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ward. The bill is now on second reading. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on House Bill 572. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Senator Gray.
Table.
Senator Gray has moved to table House Bill 572. Are you ready for the question? Parliamentary inquiry.
In 1973, before some of you were born, I sponsored the School Feeding and Nutrition Act in order to feed children in schools. Is there not a need to continue to feed children in schools today? Even that need has grown. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, D'Alessandro. I think what you were trying to say is if you're in favor of the motion to table, you would vote yes. If you're opposed to that, you would vote no. A roll call has been requested. Been seconded by Senator Reverend. If you're in favor of tabling, you would vote yes. If you're not in favor of tabling, you would vote no. What's that? A parliamentary inquiry for Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I believe children need adequate nutrition to learn, and if I believe we have a moral obligation to end childhood hunger in New Hampshire, would I vote no on the tabling motion?
Again, if you're in favor of the motion to table, you would vote yes. If you're opposed to that motion, you would vote no. The clerk will please call the roll.
Senator Gendro.
Yes.
Senator Lang.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
No.
Senator Prentice.
No.
Senator Gray.
Yes.
Senator Innes.
Yes.
Senator Ward.
Yes.
Senator Rishardi.
No.
Senator Fenton.
No.
Senator Chanley.
No.
Senator Avard.
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald.
No.
Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Whitley.
No.
Senator Murphy.
Yes.
Senator Pearl.
Yes.
Senator Susie.
No.
Senator Birdsell.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
No.
Senator Perkins Quokka.
No.
Senator Abbas.
Yes.
Senator Gannon.
Yes.
Senator Altschiller.
No.
And Senator Bradley.
Yes. The ayes have it, 13 to 11, I'm sorry. House Bill 572 is laid upon the table. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 63, an act enabling municipalities to adopt a tax credit for qualified private community property owners. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 3 to 1. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 63, inexpedient to legislate. This bill is enabling legislation that would give municipalities the option of adopting tax credits for residents that live on private roads. Rationale for this is that private roads are not maintained or required to be maintained by the town, but by the property owners. In consultation with the Assessing Standards Board, there is direction out there for the assessors to accommodate that in the assessment of the property, and therefore that led to the committee's recommendation of inexpedient to legislate. But during that process, there was a non-germane amendment introduced, and that amendment failed in committee 2-2. To consider that amendment here on the floor, we would need to vote down the inexpedient to legislate so that a further motion can be made. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? So if you're in favor of the motion of ITL, you would vote yes. If you are opposed to that, you would vote no. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed? No. The noes have it. Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move ought to pass.
Senator Gray has moved ought to pass. The bill is still on second reading, and Senator Gray is recognized for a floor amendment 2430.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 63, as we said, the committee did not believe that that was necessary legislation. Therefore, we had a non-germane amendment that would take the information that is in House Bill 154, move that to this bill, and that's what you see in Amendment 2023-2430S. What it does is, in the legislation that was passed by the House, there are concerned that the officials in the town are making decisions that would be best done by the state. And so we've added, if you look at the amendment on line 9, we've added that they can make a decision based for conditions unique to the town for their health officials. And we believe that that clears up the statute right now such that a member of the local health board cannot make a decision that would be better off done by the town, but would be able to respond to unique situations in the town if something happened, that there was some noxious substance in the air or whatever, they would be able to make an immediate decision before the rest. So I would appreciate if you would pass the amendment, and then, which is a replace all, and then vote for the bill ought to pass as amended. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Senator Perkins-Coie.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to my colleague from District 6 for his remarks. I appreciate his efforts to improve this bill, but from my perspective, there's really nothing needed here. What we're trying to address is public health ordinances, which in my mind, we have only seen are desperately needed. You know, we need the authority of local towns and cities to be able to address situations that occur to them. Most often what we heard testimony about what these ordinances affect are things like being able to spray for mosquitoes or a rodent infestation. These are highly local conditions that city and towns need the ability to address. There's really no problem with the existing process, and so I think that's why in committee we saw that the Association of Health Officers and the New Hampshire Municipal Association both opposed both the previous version of this bill and this amendment that's before you today. So I hope you can join me in voting down the floor amendment and voting down the OTPA motion. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Susi.
Mr. President, a question for my colleague from District 21.
Yes.
Thank you. Senator, didn't we hear testimony that by adding the language here that it has to be unique to the town, didn't that present the challenge that many towns could be dealing with a similar infestation, but because it wasn't unique, there could be a question of whether or not health officers could even act?
Yes, ma'am. The drafting is ambiguous, and as we all know, many of these situations that arise don't respect town boundaries.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just respond to the comments made during the question and answer. This does not prevent the state from stepping in. We have health officials in the state which can act. And if we have a condition that is regional in nature, it is appropriate for the state to take those actions and not the individual communities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of Floor Amendment 2430. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. I guess we'll have a division. If you are in favor of the floor amendment, please stand now. If you are opposed to the floor amendment, please stand now. The floor amendment fails on a 12-12 division vote. Is there a further motion? Senator Carson has moved to table. Was it Senator Chandley? My apologies. Senator Chandley has moved to table. It's a non-debatable motion. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of tabling, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Senate Bill 63 is laid upon the table. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 133 FN, an act relative to changing the date of the state primary election and creates a runoff election for federal primary election. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 4-0. Senator Abbas for the committee.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 133 FN to interim study. This bill would have moved the primary date for the United States Senate and the congressional races to May. Also would have created a runoff for those elections. However, there was some questions about the constitutionality of having a runoff in those elections, so we weren't comfortable going forward with that. I also do know that my good friend from from District 2 has filed a bill to address the primary issue that I just mentioned. So the committee will be able to address that issue in a separate legislation. Therefore, please join me in supporting the committee's recommendation of interim study. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. Is there any further discussion on the motion of interim study? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of interim study on Senate Bill 133. You're ready for the question. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Senate Bill 133 is sent to interim study. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 223, an act relative to the supervisor's checklist. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-0. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 223, inexpedient to legislate. The bill would have changed the term of the supervisor's checklist to 3 years and required them to use certain data to verify corrections to the voter checklist. The committee considered related processes that the Secretary of State will be implementing and adjustments needed to the statute for this legislation to be successful. If it was determined that these changes are not needed at this time, the Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on a motion if expedient to legislate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The recommendation is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 223. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient to legislate is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 224, an act relative to housing opportunity zones and inclusionary zoning. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 4-0. Senator Perkins-Coker for the committee.
Senator Perkins-Coker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 224 be referred to interim study. The ongoing housing crisis in New Hampshire has made it necessary for municipalities to focus on solutions for providing affordable housing. This bill would have modernized criteria for the adoption of housing opportunity zones, as well as expanded the authority of municipalities to adopt inclusionary zoning to include standards for housing affordability. Although a great deal of effort was made to ensure that all stakeholders were considered, additional changes to the language may remain necessary. Through testimony and discussion, the committee felt further education was necessary before the current language could become law. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on the motion of referred interim study for SB 224, and I'd love to speak to my motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Perkins-Coker. The motion is referred to interim study. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of interim study on Senate Bill 224. Are you ready for the question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Speak to the motion to say this was my bill, and I think that this tool remains a necessary tool for our municipalities to have in their toolbox. So I appreciate the conversation and work with my committee members. I think there's going to be an effort to see if we can improve it or better understand it this year in committee. And so I just want to thank my colleagues for their work on it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Perkins-Coker. My apologies again. I thought you were finished speaking. Okay. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer for interim study. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred House Bill 154, an act relative to the adoption of public health ordinances by municipalities. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-0. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move HB 154 ought to pass with amendment. HB 154 as amended makes changes to the election statutes to incorporate the selection of the new electronic voting counting machines. The current AccuVote devices used for New Hampshire elections have aged out and will soon no longer be supported. In order to maintain strong election integrity, a new ballot counting device has been tested and approved by the Secretary of State and the Ballot Law Commission. The committee amendments which replace all of the original language in HB 154 makes it possible for municipalities to switch to the new electronic ballot counting devices. The language in each election statute has been carefully updated to reflect the requirements for the new devices consistently throughout. These clear and very specific updates will minimize the confusion by any election official as the new devices are used in real time. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support on a motion of ought to pass as amended on House Bill 154. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on House Bill 154. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is House Bill 154 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred Senate Bill 75 FN, an act relative to the Division of Personnel in the Department of Administrative Services. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 5-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 75 to interim study. This bill creates a new chapter for the Personnel Appeals Board. This bill also repeals 6 statutes related to the Department of Administrative Service Division at their request. Legislation has been filed that has come from the Personnel Appeals Board. There were questions about how that legislation would work with this bill. In fact, this particular bill is being heard this afternoon in ED&A. When that new piece of legislation comes before this committee, the committee this afternoon, the language of this bill will be added to that. The Executive Departments and Administrative Committee asks your support for the motion of interim study. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The motion is referred to interim study. Is there any discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer to interim study on Senate Bill 75. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred Senate Bill 134 FN, an act relative to disability pensions for public safety employees or victims of violence. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 134 ought to pass with amendment. This bill establishes a retirement system benefit for Group 2 members who retire due to a violent injury. This bill will increase the state's portion of payment of the medical costs associated with violent injury obtained in the line of duty. This body has the duty and the responsibility to take care of our injured police officers and firefighters. The Executive Departments and Administration Committee asks for your support for the motion of ought to pass with amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there discussion on the committee amendment? Senator Pearl. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is an issue that has come before us a few times. I would like to point out that we have 2 individuals that are here today with us that are in the gallery, Officer Doherty and Officer Lewis, 2 individuals that have been permanently injured and would directly benefit from this bill. So I would like to take the opportunity to identify them and welcome them to the New Hampshire Senate.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just wanted to ask you to support this bill. As Senator Carson said, we have two of our local heroes with us here today, and we want to make sure that we show them that this is an important bill and that the Senate is very concerned with their well-being and the well-being of other officers and municipal employees that may run into this situation. Obviously, we're going to have a price tag that we're going to have to look at when this goes to finance, but I'm confident that we can find a way to make this happen, to recognize and offer these heroes from our community the benefits that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pearl. Senator D'Alessandro.
Just a quick, Officer Doherty was shot in my district, and his situation is a terrible, terrible tragedy. We've worked diligently to try to fix it. I sponsored some legislation. Senator Susi sponsored some legislation. This is one of the worst cases that really has ever happened in our state. This young man was in a position to give his life for our city and for the people he was serving, and has got himself in a position that it's just never going to end. It's never going to end. It's one of the great tragedies that I've seen in my time in public service. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. The bill is still on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 134. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 134 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which is referred Senate Bill 210 FN, an act relative to the licensing of software applications by state agencies. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 4-1. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 210 ought to pass with amendment. This bill will require that contracts for the purchase of software by the state do not limit the ability of state agencies to run that software using the cloud provider of its choice. This is in line with industry practice and takes the important step of encouraging integration capabilities of technology throughout the cloud. This bill, as amended, is narrowly tailored and applies only to future procurement contracts. It empowers state agencies to choose the software vendors and hardware that best meets its own business needs. The Executive Departments and Administration Committee asks for your support for the motion of ought to pass with amendment. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Senator Perkins-Coker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to support what my colleague from District 14 said. I think SB 210 has been a little bit of a mind bender for some of us, but at its base, what we are trying to do is enable our state agencies to separate their ability to procure software from their placing any software or data on a cloud. So we're giving them more tools, creating more competition, trying to keep prices low for our taxpayers. So I hope you'll join me in supporting this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Perkins-Coker. The question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 210. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 210 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Executive Departments and Administration, to which was referred, House Bill 250 FN, an act relative to the accidental death benefit payable for a retirement system member. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to committee by a vote of 5-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 250 to interim study. This bill increases the amount of the state retirement annuity payable upon the accidental death of a retirement system member, but which shall not exceed $85,000. This bill also provides the future accidental death benefits are funded from state general funds. The Retirement Benefits Commission has recommended a bill which is coming forward this session. It is appropriate to add the information in this bill to this new legislation. The RSA pertaining to the retirement system should be looked at in its entirety and not be fixed piece by piece. The Executive Departments and Administration Committee asks for your support for the motion of interim study. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The motion is refer to interim study. Is there any discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer to interim study on House Bill 250. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, which was referred, Senate Bill 178 FN, an act relative to certain specialty formulas under Medicaid. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be referred to interim study by a vote of 6-0. Senator D'Alessandro for the committee.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move interim study on Senate Bill 178 FNA. This bill would prohibit the Department of Health and Human Services from requiring Medicaid beneficiaries to spend on their own personal income on specialty formulas, food products, or internal formulas. The committee learned federal regulations would make this bill unworkable as written. Senate Bill 178 FNA was initially re-referred back to the committee to allow the department additional time to develop a different approach to address the issue of cost. The cost of these medical foods, which are life-saving, can add up to $25,000 per year. The spend down is unaffordable for someone living on disability payments. CMS would not allow an exemption from the spend down requirements for these formulas. The Senate Finance Committee recommends the motion of interim study on Senate Bill 178 FNA and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. The motion is referred to interim study. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of refer to interim study on Senate Bill 178. Are you ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of refer to interim study is adopted. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Senate Bill 173 FN, an act relative to surprise medical bills. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill be re-referred to interim study by a vote of 5-0. Senator Birdsall for the committee.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Originally, I move that Senate Bill 173 be referred to interim study, but I asked the body to vote no on the interim study, so another motion and amendment can be presented. So again, if you could vote no on the interim study, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. If you are in favor of the motion of interim study, you would say yes. If you are opposed to that, you would say no. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of referred interim study. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. Senator Birdsall has moved ought to pass. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any discussion or floor amendment? Senator Birdsall is recognized to introduce floor amendment 0049.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move amendment 2024-0049S, and I'd like to speak to my motion. Sorry.
Senator Birdsall is recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment was brought to us by the department, the insurance department, and it has been purely vetted with the state's hospitals. And what this amendment does, it actually mirrors what the federal government has done with the No Surprises Act. It expands New Hampshire's existing surprise medical bills law to enact at the state level the same prohibitions on surprise medical bills. Just as in the NSA, No Surprises Act, it prohibits surprise medical bills from out-of-network providers of emergency medical services, excluding ambulances, and 2, out-of-network providers of any health care services rendered at an in-network facility. And just as in the NSA, it requires health carriers to cover the relevant out-of-network services in the same manner as if the services were provided by an in-network provider or facility. It also establishes at the state level an independent dispute resolution process to resolve disputes about the fair value of medical services provided by out-of-network providers. This amendment is a result of much hard work and compromise between the insurance department and the representatives of the state hospitals. And at the request of the hospitals, they've put in, it gives healthcare providers and facilities a choice of whether to pursue the state or the federal IDR process, because they say that the federal is a lot longer, so hopefully the state will take a lot less time. It requires fair value disputes to be determined by a qualified independent entity. It lowers the cost of the independent process and speeds it up. It expands the definition of emergency services to mirror the NSA definition. It contains strong provision regarding timely payment by healthcare providers of out-of-network providers, and contains no provisions from any of the federal regulations that have been the subject of such much litigation. So what I'm going to ask you to do is pass this amendment, and then ought to pass as amended, but I am going to ask for a table motion after, because the department wants to be able to go to CMS and get approval for this as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. Is there any discussion on the amendment? The question is on adoption of floor amendment 0049. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading. It's open for further discussion and amendment. Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 173. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and I recognize Senator Birdsall.
Move to table.
Senator Birdsall has moved to table. Senator Carson? Senator Carson has seconded. If you're in favor of tabling, you would say yes. If you are opposed to that, you would say no. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of tabling, please say yes. Yes. Aye. Yes. Aye. If you're not in favor of that, you'll say no. The ayes have it. And Senate Bill 173 is laid upon the table. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Senate Bill 176 FN, an act relative to insurance coverage for pelvic floor therapy. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Whitley for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move SB 176 ought to pass with amendment. As introduced, this bill requires individual and group health insurance providers to cover pelvic floor therapy. The committee heard extensive testimony at our hearing in February about the barriers that stand between birthing mothers and the health care they need, especially as we see concerning high rates of maternal mortality. At the hearing, we also heard that there may be a disconnect between the policies on the books and the lived experiences on the ground for moms and providers. The committee amendment directs the insurance department to conduct a thorough review of the reality of coverage for pelvic floor therapy in our state by November 1st, 2024. With that report in hand, we can address any issues that remain with new legislation for the 2025 session. For these reasons, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on SB 176. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. The bill is now on second reading. It is open for further discussion. Senator Perkins Cuoco.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to rise to thank the members of the Health and Human Services Committee, including my colleague from District 19, my colleague from District 15. I brought this bill in response to a constituent concern about providers who, are trying to help postpartum moms and not receiving consistent reimbursement for their services. And so these are small businesses that are trying to open and stay open, trying to employ our residents, trying to serve our residents. And so I also just want to thank the Department of Insurance because they have been very collaborative with us, even in the time since this amendment was brought in sort of developing the scope of this study. So just a thank you to everyone, and I hope you'll join us in supporting this bill.
Thank you, Senator Perkins Cuoco. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 176. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 176 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Senate Bill 177 FN, an act to create orthotics and prosthetics parity and ensure coverage of orthotics and prosthetics for the performance of physical activities for children 18 years of age and younger. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Prentice for the committee.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 177 ought to pass with amendment. As introduced, this bill, which I call So New Hampshire Kids Can Move, creates orthotics and prosthetics parity. This is as it was introduced, and requires health insurance providers to cover prosthetics and orthotic devices for the performance of physical activities for children of 18 years or younger. At our hearing in February, we heard about the importance of these devices as children who have suffered limb loss are attempting to live healthy, active, normal lifestyles. We also learned about the high cost of these devices and the precision and detail which goes into crafting these for children so that they can participate in sports. The committee retained the bill, and then we worked on an amendment, which the committee has adopted, that removes the requirement for orthotic devices and drills down to the issue of prosthetics for activity-related needs. These are things like a running blade, an extra strong leg to support weightlifting, again, so that children can move despite a limb loss that they may have suffered. For these reasons, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee asks your support on motion of ought to pass for Senate Bill 177. And if I can, I'd like to briefly speak to my motion. Thank you, Senator Bradley. I think collaboration is the theme of the day, because I too would like to thank the Department of Insurance, the healthcare community, the commercial carriers, and the Senate HHS committee for working with me on this bill so we could get it right for New Hampshire children who are in need. These, again, are New Hampshire children who have suffered limb loss because of trauma, because of a congenital defect, or cancer. So these are, but these children still want to be on the playground, they want to ski, they want to play basketball, and we can support them in doing that, and the commercial carriers have agreed to it. Part of this process that was so important is going through an insurance mandate review, which I learned a lot about how the Department of Insurance works, and this review process confirmed what we already knew. It said, you know, if we do this, we will be preventing medical conditions down the road by supporting healthy, active lifestyles for our youth, which is so important. And it also inserted medical decision-making, so it has to be medically necessary in order to be approved, as well as an appeal process. Again, thank you everyone for the collaboration. I ask your support.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any further discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 177. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amendment is adopted. Senate Bill 177 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred Senate Bill 185 FN, an act relative to protective services for vulnerable adults and the definition of abandonment. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Carson for the committee.
Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 185 FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill, as introduced, would have added the definition of abandonment to the protective services to adult division of RSA 161:F on elderly and adult services. As amended, this bill will establish a committee to study the various barriers to safely discharge patients from acute care facilities. Upon conversations with various stakeholders and the prime sponsor, the Judiciary Committee determined we need to further examine this issue before any legislation is enacted. This committee will identify barriers to discharge for patients who are medically cleared for discharge but unable to leave the acute care facility. It will examine the effect such barriers have on the system of care and provide a forum for stakeholders involved in the provision of services for patients in post-acute care. Our elderly population has spent their lives working and giving back to the state, and it's only appropriate that we support and protect them now. For these reasons, the Judicial Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on Senate Bill 185 FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Do you wish to speak? Yep.
First of all, I'm recommending a study committee, and in our hallowed tradition, I'm volunteering to work on this. It does have 2 senators, and I'm hoping my good friend from District 5 will be able to work on this with me. I spent a lot of time trying to reach a resolution for this, but the more you talked with people, the more complicated it became. Because we have a problem here in the state, Mr. President, of our elderly being abandoned in hospitals. And they end up being there unnecessarily, it has a huge effect on their mental health. And it's also taking up needed beds. So we need to get to the bottom of this. We also found out they're being subjected to financial abuse as well. So this isn't just something that we're going to be able to resolve quickly. We need to look at it, we need to take it apart, and then we need to put it back together in order to provide the best service and protection for our state's elderly. So thank you very much, Mr. President. I would ask all my colleagues to please support the decision that the Judiciary Committee made. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carson. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any discussion or further amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 185. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. Senate Bill 185 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred Senate Bill 248 FN, an act relative to bail for a defendant. Having considered the same, the committee recommends the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 4 to 1. Senator Abbas for the committee.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 248 ought to pass. This bill would amend the statute governing some of the bail laws in our state. This body has continued to evaluate and propose solutions to some of the bail issues that have plagued our state since we passed bail reform back in 2018. This bill would take a commensurate approach that would identify very specific crimes where an individual who is charged with one of those offenses would be held and brought before a judge as opposed to a bail commissioner to determine their bail status. We're talking the crimes that we've listed here. We're talking violent crimes where the victim is a person, or a sex crime against a child. Those are the only offenses that would apply when a person is brought before a judge as opposed to the bail commissioner. This is necessary to keep our state safe. You cannot have the New Hampshire advantage without public safety. And I will tell you this, right now there is a procedural flaw in our bail system. If a person is arrested and then the bail commissioner were to let them out on bail, the practice is that that person would then waive their arraignment and not appear in court for at least 30 days, if not longer. Now, if that person is charged with a violent offense and the prosecutor wishes for that person to be held, what they would have to do is notify that person, have a hearing. They have to give 48 hours notice. Think of the crimes that I just mentioned, violent crimes, domestic violence, often escalating offenses. But child pornography, what do you think that person does when they're released? Yes, their computer may have been confiscated, but they get released, they can go and buy another computer, continue to victimize children, exploit children online like they've been doing that led them to the place they are in the first place. This corrects that procedural flaw that keeps New Hampshire families safe, keeps us the safest state in the country, but let's improve on that. We shouldn't give up. This is something that we should take very serious, and please join me in keeping our state safe and supporting the ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? The question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 248 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred House Bill 135 FN, an act prohibiting no-knock warrants. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment with a vote of 4 to 1. Senator Chanley for the committee.
Senator Chanley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move House Bill 135 FN ought to pass with amendment. This bill, as amended by the House, would have prohibited law enforcement officer from seeking, executing, or participating in the execution of a no-knock search warrant and exceptions thereto. As amended by the Judiciary Committee, this bill would limit the circumstances under which law enforcement officer may obtain or execute a no-knock search warrant. The committee heard wide-ranging testimony on this bill. While this bill does not ban no-knock warrants, it lays out clear and concise standards that would justify its use. This bill strikes a common-sense balance between public safety and holding law enforcement agencies accountable to the people. For these reasons, a majority of the Judiciary Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass with amendment on House Bill 135FN. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chandley. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Senator Lang.
Can I speak after the committee amendment, please?
Yeah, of course. All right. The bill is on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor of the committee amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The amendment is adopted. The question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended. Now, Senator Lang.
President. So members, I call your attention. This bill, I think, has an unintended consequence that wasn't thought about. If you look in your packet on page 14 where the amendment resides on section 3, I'm concerned about the section as a former law enforcement officer who's actually obtained search warrants and executed search warrants. Under section 3, the concern I have is where it talks about any law enforcement officer involved in executing a search warrant shall be recognizable and identifiable as a uniformed law enforcement officer. And the reason this issue comes to concern is it's not uncommon for, let's say, the Major Crimes Unit of State Police, who is not a uniformed division of State Police, to execute a search warrant. So if you follow on in that page, the last 3 lines, my concern is says, if Major Crimes executed a search warrant not in uniform and obtained evidence, if you read the last 2 lines, it says no evidence obtained in the search warrant in violation of this subparagraph, non-uniformed officer, shall be admitted into evidence for the state for any prosecution. So my concern is that we're inadvertently creating this loophole where in a drug case where an undercover officer may come on site and find evidence after a search warrant, a door's been breached, and they're searching and they bring a non-uniformed officer in to do additional searches, and that non-uniformed officer finds evidence, is that evidence allowed admissible into court? And the literal reading of this I take is that the answer would be no. We'd be prohibiting that evidence from being entered because the officer wasn't uniformed at the time that he found it. So I'm concerned about this. I'm going to be voting against the OTP and the OTPA recommendation and ask my colleagues to follow so an ITL motion can be made.
Thank you, Senator Lang. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judiciary Committee, and I should say I worked on this bill, as we got this bill, it was difficult to understand because at one point it said we're banning no-knock warrants, and then it said, but you can do them under certain circumstances. That's not good law. It's confusing to people. And so what I did was just, in a way, just got rid of the ban altogether and then just put the definition of what it was and then use the language that came from the House. It makes sense. No-knock warrants are usually not done in the afternoon. They're usually done at night, usually in the middle of the night, sometime, after midnight. And imagine you're in your home, in your bed, you're sleeping, and all of a sudden your door is pushed open and people are yelling and screaming. You're confused. I think the average person would just truly be, what in the world is going on here? And one of the things you're going to think is this a home invasion? Is this a home invasion? And there's some things that could happen that are not very good. So asking that the police wear some identification so once you wake up out of your stupor of being woken up in the middle of the night, can recognize that this is a police officer. They have to identify. Now, there is a term of art in law. It's called the fruit of the poison tree. And that's where it says anything that was found outside the search warrant cannot be used as evidence if the search warrant was illegal. This is striking a balance, as my good friend from District 10 said, between the civil rights of an individual and law enforcement. We know nationally there have been issues where the law enforcement has made mistakes and people have died. We have had an instance that I know of where the warrant had the wrong address and they went into the wrong house. Can you imagine if that was you? We're trying to do something very narrow because it is important that the police have the ability to do this. There are circumstances that are warranted. But if the search warrant is illegal, they've done something wrong, it shouldn't be introduced. They were at fault. Now, we're lucky here in New Hampshire. Our police officers are very professional. And we're hoping that there's not going to be a problem. But people need to know that their civil rights are going to be protected in this circumstance. So I'm asking you to please support what we've done here. I did have a meeting with the chiefs. They told me they can live with it. They've said something to somebody else. But I think this is a reasonable stand for us to take. We're protecting people's civil rights and their property, but recognizing there are times when the police need to do something like this. And we are saying, okay, if you're going to do this, this is the circumstances. This is how it's going to get done. And you have to follow the law. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Whitley.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the bill and want to thank my friend from District 14. Her work on this bill, striking that balance between civil rights and public safety. That's why I am proud to be on the Judiciary Committee with her as chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Senator Gannon.
I request a 2-minute recess.
We will be in recess for 2 minutes. The Senate will resume its session without objection. House Bill 135 is special ordered to our next session on the 18th of January. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred House Bill 596FN, an act prohibiting the use of racial profiling in law enforcement activities in sentencing. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Abbas for the committee.
Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that HB 596FN ought to pass with an amendment. And this bill was introduced that would prohibit the use of racial profiling by law enforcement officers. And I would ask that I will speak more on the amendment, but I think the amendment is essential, and I hope that we adopt it because there is a drafting flaw in the original draft because paragraph 1 and paragraph 3 are in complete contradiction of each other. And that would create a lot of legal confusions that would take a long time to sort out. I'll speak more on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Senator Whitley.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the committee amendment because I truly believe that New Hampshire is ready to put a stake in the ground that racial profiling of any kind has absolutely no place in the Granite State. We all know that Governor Sununu's Law Enforcement Accountability Commission recommended several years ago that all law enforcement receive training on how to avoid any racial profiling and to collect data on the topic. During the hearing on this bill last year, we heard testimony from our own House members who had been victims of racial profiling. We simply cannot ignore that our state has to reckon with this issue. The amendment before us unnecessarily limits the definition of racial profiling from the practice of relying to any degree on race to the practice of relying solely on these factors. This is not a drafting error. The version that the House passed prohibiting racial profiling to any degree on race is the stake in the ground that this body should also maintain. I have heard little to no reason why this limitation in the amendment is necessary, particularly when we heard from folks in the field from the criminal defense bar that the use of the word solely in the committee amendment creates virtually an impossible burden to apply. I want to call this body to the attention of a law passed in 2022, championed by Speaker Packard. This legislature passed together a bipartisan law outlawing profiling of motorcyclists. That legislation did not unnecessarily limit motorcycle profiling, as this amendment does. I would ask my colleagues, why are we so willing to clearly prohibit absolutely any profiling of motorcyclists, but we are not ready to do the same for our communities of color? What message are we sending if we pass this committee amendment? All Granite Staters deserve safety when they're on the road, and all Granite Staters deserve to feel that they will not be singled out just because of the color of their skin. So I would ask the body to vote against the committee amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Whitley. Senator Abbas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just get into some further detail about what the amendment does, because the original bill says you can't rely on race to any degree, but then the third paragraph says that you can rely on race in these certain circumstances. Well, those certain circumstances will conflict with the any degree section. All right? That is a circular reasoning there that is not going to really create any solutions. It simply creates a problem. I would also point out, in respect to motorcycles, that is not a protected class. That is not a constitutional right to drive a motorcycle. That is a privilege. When it comes to racial equality, that is a constitutional privilege. There is a difference. What we're doing here, racial profiling is already unconstitutional, but we're codifying it now at the state level. And when we say solely on race, it's because that's what racial profiling is when simply because of your race, you are being profiled. That's what racial profiling is. This gives a clear definition of what it is. And I understand this is an issue that a lot of us want to take serious. I know what it's like to be racially profiled. It is very offensive. But at the same time, it's important to identify when it's actually happening and not someone just simply being pulled over or questioned because of they fit a description of an individual. Law enforcement need to be able to do their job, and making accusations simply because someone fits a description is not racial profiling. But according to this bill, I mean, the sections do conflict, but that any degree section would prevent that, making it virtually impossible to give a description of a suspect over any type of dispatch. This corrects that and makes it clearer to enforce, and it's something that can actually be done to move us forward on this very important issue. So please join me in adopting the committee's amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Abbas. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, are you ready for the question, which is adoption of the committee amendment? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Seeing none, are you ready for the question of adoption of the ought to pass motion on House Bill 596? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted. House Bill 596 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. All right, we are now at the consent calendar. One bill was removed from consent. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Judiciary, to which was referred, House Bill 307 FN, an act relative to attorney fees and actions under the right to know law. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Chanley for the committee.
Senator Chanley.
Thank you, Mr. President. House Bill 307 FN allows for awarding of attorney's fees to a requester who goes to court over the withholding of government records, provided that the court finds in favor of the requester and provided that such judgment is not reconsidered or reversed. It removes the requirement that the court find that the public body knew or should have known that such conduct was in violation of statute. The bill clarifies that public bodies and public agencies may be awarded attorney's fees provided that the court renders a judgment against the requester that is not reconsidered or reversed. I ask that the body join the committee in recommending ought to pass, and I do understand that there is a floor amendment to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Chanley. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Questions on adoption of the committee amendment? Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading and open for further discussion or amendment. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to introduce floor amendment 2024-0029S and speak to it, please.
Senator Carson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, when we made all the corrections, the effective date was not changed. So what this amendment does is just change the effective date to January 1st, 2025. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? The question is on adoption of the floor amendment 0029. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading, open for further discussion or amendment. Seeing no discussion, the question is on adoption of ought to pass as amended on House Bill 307. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is adopted, and House Bill 307 is ordered to the Committee on Finance. All right. I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the early session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time, that all bills and resolutions ordered to a third reading be, by this resolution, read a third time. All titles be the same as adopted, and that they be passed at the present time.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The early session is adjourned. We're now in the late session. Are there any very brief announcements or personal privileges? Because 3 committees are meeting at 1 o'clock, and those committee members want lunch. Senator Fenton.
I'll make it very brief. I just wanted to share some personal news. My wife and I are expecting our 3rd baby. Yeah, thank you. A baby girl due in June, so we're done with stinky boys. So we finally got our girl. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Awesome. Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll try to make it as brief as I can because I know everyone wants lunch. Oh, my goodness gracious, Mr. President. Well, hunger and thirst for justice' sake, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. That's one of the 8 Beatitudes. Okay, General Roland LaJoy passed away. Roland was a 3-star general in the United States Army. He was my fraternity brother at the University of New Hampshire and a teammate on the lacrosse team. General LaJoy was the youngest of 8 kids growing up in Nashua, New Hampshire. He shined shoes as a kid in high school. His family pooled enough money together to send him to UNH. Went to UNH, graduated in 1958, was in the officers training program. In those days, everybody at UNH was a member of the ROTC for their first 2 years. LaJoy went on to a distinguished military career, and he was a great American. There are those who credit LaJoy with the prevention of World War III because of the work he did with the Soviet Union in the sector of Berlin that was controlled by the Americans. One of his colleagues was shot by a Soviet officer. The Soviet officer claimed he was just trying to wound him, but LaJoy knew that they were trying to kill LaJoy. Because of his courage and his ability, to speak Russian, and because he was a uniform officer, he had the respect of the Russians, he was able to get some things done. After the Cold War, he was responsible for the dismantling of the ICBMs. He was responsible for dismantling over 2,000 bombs, 2,000 atomic bombs, and was part of the creation of the treaty where America was buying the fuel and sending it to this country to place in our reactors. LaJoy was a man of real courage, just a tremendous, tremendous human being. His son-in-law was a 2-star general in the Air Force. His other son was a colonel in the Army. Guys like Roland LaJoy go under the counter. We forget about him. But this guy served us at the most difficult time in the history of this country. When the Soviets were there, when they had 20,000 nuclear bombs, we had 30,000 nuclear bombs. The world was in chaos. One slip could have caused a world conflict. Roland LaJoy, a kid from Nashua, New Hampshire, who went to the University of New Hampshire, was in the ROTC program, was responsible for saving us. A truly, truly great American. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. Is there any further business? Seeing none, I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the business of the day being completed, that the Senate recess to the call of the chair For the purposes of introducing legislation, re-referring bills to committee, scheduling hearings, sending and receiving messages, vacating bills, and processing enrolled bill reports and amendments, and when we recess to the call of the chair.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Without objection, all personal privileges or unanimous consent or other remarks shall be entered into the permanent journal of the Senate per Rule 216 and 217. The Senate is in recess to the call of the chair.